So, hello everybody. This is Simon over in Clermont-Ferrand, where it's about -1 degrees and it's a bit cold in this corner where I'm sitting. And this is for the Clavier project, Tutor Mentor project, and Kentucky projects as well. So this is me, Simon. I'm speaking with Terry and Daniel.
Good morning. I'm Dan Bassill. I'm here from Chicago, and it's a little bit warmer than it is with you guys. It's been real cold last week. I created the Tutor Mentor Connection back in 1993, trying to help a volunteer-based youth serving tutor and mentor program to grow in high poverty areas all over Chicago. And through the internet, I'm trying to share that with people in different cities.
And I'm Terry Elliott, and I saw my first starry morning in the last 10 days. It's been so overcast and snowy and cold and crazy here that we just haven't had much sun. So I'm looking outside and I'm seeing the sun. I'm hoping it melts the rest of the snow away and that we just have a great conversation here.
Sounds good.
I thought perhaps we could start with the idea of mapping, because I seem to have been doing quite a lot of mapping over the past couple of weeks. Mapping of what my activity has been, what I'm doing, who's doing what, and I'm working in teaching of English. So I've been busy mapping how I connect with other people.
I think that's a good idea. I've used mapping in maybe at least 3 different ways. One is geographic mapping, where you can map indicators of poverty or health disparities, or things that show some places on the map need more help than other places. And using the map as a platform, then anyone within the map boundaries, business, churches, political leaders, anyone can do things to call people together to try to fill the map with needed services based on understanding that grows from collaboration and learning and so forth. So that's one form of mapping, geographic mapping. Another form is concept mapping, which there's different concept mapping tools that have emerged. The blackboard that Terry shows for his class assignments is really a form of concept mapping done with handwritten notes. I start a lot of my maps with handwritten notes and then convert them using a CMap tool to an electronic format. So a concept map can be an outline of information you want to share to people. It can be a blueprint of what you have in your library, or it can be a roadmap of how a group of people get from where they are today to where they want to be some point in the future.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned maps. Daniel sent me a map. I sent both of us a map, and I put it over in the chat. And I responded to it there, and that's been one of the uses I've had of. I just think very generally of a map as any flat space where you lay down something, an idea, or like Daniel says, a concept, something to be shared, and it's digital ways have allowed us to do maps in different kinds of maps, different ideas of maps. Like you mentioned, Daniel, I've been trying to, it just occurred to me recently that I make notes to myself in the morning, sometimes on a 3x5 card, sometimes on a blackboard, and that it really is a map of what I'm trying to do and how I'm trying to strategize. And it's also a trap, in that the map is not intended to control, it's intended to help. It's intended to be an aid to something larger. And it's just when we started talking last time about strategy and unstrategy, it occurred to me that I needed to make my morning maps for my classes at least more about what I was mapping it onto, which was a space, a classroom space, right? And using Vialogs, I'm able to look at what I did and then reflect on what I was going to do and then reflect on what I did. It's just it never occurred to me to use YouTube and Vialogs together like that as more than just response, but as a way to kind of unflatten the map, right? Because maps, that's one of the problems with a map, is that they're flat and they don't represent. They do represent the territory in very like a cross-sectional way, but like you said, Daniel, it's not the map itself. It's what people do with the map and the information that's in it that's important. It's that unflattening of the map into action, and that's where I am right now with my maps.
I've been looking quite a lot about coming back to this business of mapping where people go of their own accord. If you don't actually provide any constraints, and mapping as terms of power, so in terms of what credit people receive, what pay people receive, and how that actually plays out. One thing which I've noticed is that if I take my classrooms, and I imagine that could be the case of any community, you have a whole selection of different behavior going on, and some of it is related to extrinsic factors. So people are behaving in a particular way because they think they're going to get something out of the institution or out of the teacher. And then there's a lot of other behavior going on which is related to their perhaps peers, which has nothing to do with the credit they're going to get from the institution, but simply credit from their peers. And what's been quite interesting is that I attended an exhibition which was set up by students last week, and that student was not actually done for credit as such at all. It was outside of their credit, and yet that was the most rewarding work that they'd actually done, and the most work they'd done was nothing to do with credit at all. And so coming back to what I'm doing again with language teaching, I think that the boundaries of how people get paid or how people receive a mark is very much dominated by big institutions, or it'd be in the States or in the UK, which are actually determining this is how you are going to behave with these students, and this is the sort of exercises that you're going to be doing with these students, and that's got very little to do with actually learning a language, and it's got very little to do with what the people want or don't want. It's to do with capital, really. It's to do with power. And when I'm looking now, I've been doing some research over the past couple of weeks of how teachers respond to those different frameworks and how students respond to those frameworks. It's very clear that we're constantly knocking up against, so am I going to be paid for this?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I had this semester-long research project, and I call it in class a research thing because I don't want to nail it down to being like the default research paper, because that's a dead end for some people. For others, I mean, that's their thing. That's what they want to do, and it's a real struggle to get out of these power relationships and to get into empowering them. I don't even like that word, but that's what I'm trying to do, is to get them to move from this extrinsic measure to some kind of intrinsic strength. That's the only real strength they have is an intrinsic strength, and then moving out towards others to share what we have and what we are. And it's, you know, it could be as simple as curiosity. It's just so much curiosity has been just beaten from my students that they no longer, that should be the default, is curiosity. You know,
That should be the fuel.
Yes.
Have either of you heard or used the concept of backward mapping? I mentioned it. I read a paper by a guy at Harvard, Lynn Elmore. Elmore was his last name, and back in the 1990s. And what backward mapping is where do you want to be? Where are you now? How do you get from where you are now to where you want to be? What are the steps? When we posted a conversation before Christmas, what are all the things we need to do to help kids born or living in poverty be in jobs and careers by age 25? That could be a 25-year process for each kid born today. Well, the where you want to be is something that can unify people, can excite people. Where are we now and how do we get there is something that could engage people in the process. So if in your classroom exercises, for instance, if you started a class or even before kids enrolled for a class, there was another set of classes that said, where do you want to be when you finish this class, or when you finish this school, or when you finish this university? Now let's engage in some brainstorming and some mapping process that says, where are you now? I'm a first-year student. I'm a second, third-year student. This is my background. Now, what am I going to have to do over the next few weeks or the next few years in order to get to the goal I want to reach? You know, when we talk about tutoring and mentoring and working with kids, what we're really talking, the mentoring part of it is what do you aspire to be? All kids need to have some internal motivation and stimulate curiosity and stimulate the work they do where they want to go. Rich kids have more naturally occurring influences to expand what they want to be. Kids in poor neighborhoods have fewer models of what they could be, and therefore their aspirations maybe are more limited or less motivated. The role of the mentor or the role of the organization providing the mentors is, first, how do I help that young person aspire to be something? Well, in a lot of conversations, a kid says, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be like my mentor in what my mentor does. What the mentor has to learn to do is say, okay, where are we now, and what do you need to do over the next X number of years to get there? As the mentoring year goes on and the mentor or the tutor learns the academic abilities and performance of the student, you might look at their one-on-one activities. If the mentor begins to say, oh, your report card says you're failing in reading or you're not doing well in science, but you said you want to be a this or a that, if you don't do well at these things, you're not going to get there. So you're working on where do you want to be, what do I got to do to get there, the things I got to do to get there. If the student's involved in mapping that, then that creates some shared ownership.
Yeah. Yeah. Just as a suggestion, Simon, if it's getting too loud there, you could turn your mic off.
Okay. Okay.
And then turn it back on when you, whatever.
Okay. Yeah, I think that what Daniel's talking about, we do this in terms of language learning. So they all have their personal learning diary in which they actually project what they actually want to do and how they want to get there. So that's something we do. I think the problem comes is that a lot of them don't actually want to get anywhere. And if you ask them, so what is it that you actually aspire to, they just don't really aspire to anything. Apart from continuing with doing the same things.
we do that. I started doing this in the last couple of years in my classes. Is these guided journaling exercises where I ask them to consider where they are, but more importantly, it's through a series of questions. I try to get them to imagine what it would be like at the end of our time together, what they have done, what they have, processes they've gone through, and just kind of imagine forth the ending, like you're talking about, Daniel. It's and then if you can imagine forth something, perhaps you can also find a way, and that's my job, I think, in part, not entirely, just in part, is to shepherd them along towards that thing that they're imagining. And like Simon, I get a lot of it's as if they don't know what to do. They don't know, what do you mean, imagine it? And I'm stuck sometimes there. It's not every student who's like that, but so many of them seem a little bereft, that they can't even think of okay, here's a thing, okay, here's a paper, here's a podcast, here's a blog, here's a, just some sort of thing that represents where they went in the semester, and it's just inconceivable to them. What do you mean, where am I going to be? How can I work backwards from something if there's no something to work from, right? And I think a lot of times, and you probably discover this in poverty areas as a tutor, is that there are very, very limited somethings that these kids want to work towards. And I've seen it referred to in class. I got a friend of mine in Colorado, Brian Crosby, who did this with kids, and that was one of the first things he discovered was not only can they not imagine where they could be, they can't even imagine where they are right now. Many of them didn't even know their own phone numbers, addresses. There are reasons for that. They moved a lot. There are a lot of he works with a lot of with the immigrant kids, and it's just it's a great idea. I think it's kind of behind what people do with curricula, which is a little disturbing to me, because they, by backwardly mapping, they lock it down. And I don't think that's what you're talking about at all, Daniel, because you're talking about a relationship between a tutor and a mentor that recognizes that each path is going to be different in some way, similar but different, and very idiosyncratic.
Well, it's a cyclical process. It's let's get together. Let's do what we do. Let's learn from what's available to us. Let's decide what we're going to do. Let's do it, and now let's evaluate what worked, what didn't work, what do we want to change, what new things have we learned, what new things do we want to learn, and let's do the cycle again. I use the maps in a lot of different ways. A couple of the maps I show a timeline, so that birth to work timeline has preschool, elementary school, middle school, high school, post-high school, and work, where the first 25 years the segments are pretty easy to see, but the next 40 years are less easy to see. You're an adult, and you need to keep learning. Well, if the timeline is put in front of a group of people, the problems you guys are describing are kids coming into your classroom without some built-in tools that would help them be more successful learners and you be more successful educators. And since they're there, you have to do what you can with what you got. But my premise is that maybe you and them could be in a process as what would have changed where we are now if it had started when you were coming into first grade. And what might be the things that over you're coming up through the K-12 years might give you more momentum going into the post-high school and into the work years. And as you begin to break, those become lists of things that, gee, these things might have helped, and their list be developed with the help of the student community and other people, not just you sitting and scratching your head and say, what do I put on this list? As the list grows, they begin to go to a process that says, all right, what can the adult world, facilitated by the university world, do to help make those things available that we think would be helpful in all of the areas which are a source of our future students. And the mapping shows that they are or they are not available in the places where they need to be. And the interactions and all kinds of different things help you understand what works and what's not working and what needs to work better. But it's well, you got to deal with the here and now. They're in your classroom, and how do we do what we can to engage them so that when they leave your classroom, maybe they're further toward where they want to go or need to go. But a portion of your time is what can I do to build the pipeline or the infrastructure that in the future might bring more kids into the classroom better prepared to succeed.
I'm thinking about this business of mapping, and I was trying to think of myself at the age of 22. I would not have been able, I don't think I'd be able now to do that. I did not work like that. What I actually had was a certain amount of self-belief and I suppose an underlying love which enabled me to actually not have a map, really. I didn't have any idea where I was going. I didn't know how that would pan out, but that was exactly the point. For me, it was an adventure, and I think for many kids, the map that they think or perhaps is being offered to them doesn't correspond to their reality. When I was speaking to the entrepreneurs who were present at this exhibition, what was interesting was that they didn't speak in terms of certainty. They spoke in terms of opportunity and in terms of adventure, and that's something which I can relate to much more. They said to me, okay, well, if you can help us out, perhaps that would be interesting for us to develop our activity. And I think that for me is where we're at. I think that we have to enable kids, even if they have a very clear plan, to deal with the idea that they may not know they have the same plan 5 minutes later. And I think for me that's the most important.
I just posted a link to one of my concept maps, and I call it, it's a race poverty map, where it shows two wheels, where the spokes on each wheel represent issues that are prevalent in the lives of people as they grow through life. And if you look at the map, issues that rich people have and poor people have, many of them are the same. It's that the things they have available to help them overcome the challenges or take advantage of the opportunities are different. What you just described is that, you know, I talk to people and say, why don't you start off with a blank piece of paper and draw a map that showed where you got from when you were born to today. And if you put yourself as the hub of the wheel, then you could draw a timeline through that hub that on the left side is being born, and on the right side is where you are today. Above the line would be the official schooling support you had, and below the line would be the family and community support you had. The spokes would lead out to the different influences that were available to you at different times as you grow up. If you were in an affluent area, your map would have a far richer density of spokes of people in your community, your family, your neighborhood, your church, your school, that gave you all kinds of motivations and aspirations and aid to help you along that path. If you grew up in a poorer neighborhood, you would have less things on the spokes, and you would have some things on the spokes that aren't there in the affluent neighborhood, which would be poverty or prison or lack of all kinds of different negatives that are associated with poverty. One exercise that you might go through is to engage your kids in looking at that diagram and talking which side of the map are you from, and what sort of benefits and opportunities does that create, or what sort of challenges, and what are the things that people on the one side can do to help people on the other side, and what are ways we can create bridges connecting the two. That may be too much for a single classroom, but it certainly it could be something that could be part of a coming to the university or coming to the high school first year class or ongoing class, so that it's an institutional challenge, not a single classroom challenge.
Yeah, I think you could. I think that I could adapt that quite easily in my classroom, because I do emphasize, when I talk about research over and over again, I emphasize the importance of face-to-face, people-based research as being way more efficient than Google or online research, especially at a university where you have expertise just right at hand. And all you have to do is overcome your fear of asking strangers questions or of approaching your professor, which is, it's a big deal for some kids. And the notion of networking could easily be worked into this, helping them to imagine what resources they could have to help them produce the things that they want to produce. And, it would be a relatively simple thing to do in a classroom. I think you could do it in a single 50-minute time slot, is to get them to map out what they may not have ever mapped out before, never made obvious to themselves anyway. There's a lot of times they're just not aware. They are aware, but they're not aware of the resources that they have. And then to talk about it in class and share the maps, and then go back to them and say, okay, I saw this in somebody else's map, I've got that resource, or I want this resource. So, I could see mapping as a very good way to add to my guided journaling exercise to help, and to do this on an ongoing basis. I always have students come back to their guided journals and try to re-inspire themselves from the stuff that they've already created, and to add to it as well as the semester goes on, until they get closer and closer to whatever it is that they want to do.
And you said that for some kids, having the confidence to reach out to their professor and ask for help is something. It's a challenge for them. I think that's a challenge for a lot of kids. If you think of the university as a small universe, reaching out to the different stars in the universe for help is a challenge. Well, if you think of life as a bigger universe, having a network of people that could help you, and having the confidence to reach out to that network, is a skill that needs to be learned. And so one of the things, as you're thinking about this as an exercise in the classroom at the college level, would be to say, could we do something to connect the local high school where the college kids are leading a network mapping, network understanding process with high school kids, intended to help high school kids learn to map their network, know the network, understand and use the network. And frankly, that the high school kids are reaching down to elementary school kids and doing the same thing.
Yeah.
What the benefit of that is that trying to take a 20-year-old kid and teach them a concept they haven't learned and they're not comfortable with is like pulling teeth. But having them try to teach that concept to a younger person engages them in a different way. And while their goal is to teach the younger person, they're learning the process at the same time. And those conversations across students with students, the real beauty of what we're doing today is the three of us are in three different parts of the world talking about this thing. There could be classrooms from different parts of the world involved in network building and network management and so forth, talking to each other on Google Hangouts, on MOOCs, all kinds of different things in ways that motivate when your work is being looked upon by someone else. When you guys write about my work, you guys give me inspiration and motivation to keep doing my work. Creating opportunities where the ideas of your students are being looked upon by their peers and by other people is a form of motivation building and recognition that just fuels the process.
I think that this is what you were just saying is something which is, for me, the most important thing. It's the realization that behind the books, behind the libraries, behind the universities, the schools, are people. And when Terry talked about people are much more important, and when you talked about mapping, for me, suddenly the word mapping takes a greater significance, because really, this is really what is the key thing. Is a map. If you have a map of your local area, or Chicago, or Clermont-Ferrand, or Kentucky, or wherever it is, what really has meaning for you are those places where you go, and those places where you have interaction with people. The spaces where you don't go are unfamiliar to you and really don't really exist. So we may have a sort of world view because we have a globe, but the real key issue is with whom am I engaging, and who actually means something to me. And I think that for many academics, the problem is that when they're talking about their speciality, they're talking about people who mean something to them. And they don't actually transfer that to the students because they are still at the book level. And I think for maps, it's the same thing, or for strategies, it's the same thing. It's a question of people being able to actually connect with people that they can identify with, that have meaning for them, and they can have interaction which is helpful for them. And that's how I develop. And that's how those students will develop. And therefore, we have to stop viewing university as a place of learning, and university as you say, as a universe where there are people, and we can identify the resources that exist, and we can enrich those resources, whether it be for a classroom, or for a course, or for a university, or for a community. But the real resource is people.
So if you think of that race poverty map that I showed you, an exercise within the classroom could be that each student builds a map showing their network. Network analysis tools enable you to do that. Well, if you map where the people in your network live or work, that creates a spatial understanding of your network, and probably would begin to show, I think what you were alluding to is that depending on where you were born and what your level of affluence or poverty is, the spatial map is going to show a greater density of contacts around kids who are more affluent, less contact with kids across lines. The rich kids have fewer contacts in the poor neighborhoods. The poor kids have fewer contacts in the affluent neighborhoods. The rich kids have a greater density of networks. The poor kids have a weaker density of networks. And that's a conversation of self-realization. The real potential, though, is when you begin to say, all right, now what does that lead to? What does that lead to? Greater inequality, and why is that important to me? What harm does or benefit, and so forth? And then what can we do to change the map? Could we look at this map 1 year, 5 years, 10 years into the future, and can each of our maps show more connections across the map than what it started with? And what benefit does that result in? Does the map of the poor kids show a growing density of influence and opportunities that weren't there before because of what the rich kids did to help make that happen, and what the intermediary, whether it be the classroom teacher, the school, the business, or whatever, that facilitated that process. Yeah, so the spatial mapping can show you what is, and over time, it can show you what has changed because of what you did. It can be a tool of accountability. I use maps of Chicago, and I break it down by political district. The alderman wards, the congressional districts, the legislative districts, the commissioner districts. Each one of those can be mapped to show the level of poverty and inequality in the district of each different elected official. And the people in the district can be looking at that information to say, has anything changed during the term of that person that causes me to want to reelect that person? Or should I be looking at somebody else who promises a better strategy that would create change and benefit that shows up as a measure of accountability on the map? So there's an engagement with the map, both in terms of what it's telling us now, what it's showing us is happening because of how we use our network and our own talents, and what it shows us in the future of where we are then as a result of what we've done from now until then.
I think in terms of I'm trying to think in terms of the possible, and I think that's a limitation I have. I think in terms of my of K through 12 teachers in the areas where I live, and how much you would have to carve out of the existing political structure. And you know, every educational institution is first and foremost a political institution and a political structure. And what we're suggesting here is being done by teachers everywhere, but it's not being done by most teachers. The idea that there's this process of networking that you can carry on every year that you are in school and refine and get better at is not something that is being done anywhere that I know of, which isn't to say it shouldn't be done, but one of the problems is that there's a zero-sum game in educational institutions, and it's filled with curricula and content and really a lot of jive. I'm not saying that teaching kids their alphabet and teaching them how to read is jive. What I'm saying is that there's so much, like here we have something called the core content that every school teaches, and you look at it and you say, well, that's not so bad, you know, that's something to aspire to. But then I try to add this element that you're talking about in there, and it doesn't. It's not that it wouldn't fit. It's just there's no room for it, and there's this incredible blind spot about the kinds of things that you're suggesting. I mean, it's revolutionary. Honestly, it is revolutionary, and I'm doing little things in my classroom to make the revolution happen. And Simon's doing things in his revolution, in his classroom, his classrooms. You know, I don't even think he calls them classrooms anymore. his spaces, and it's very frustrating. And I know you have dealt with this issue, the political nature of networking and data and sharing for a long time, and I guess I have too in all of my classrooms. And basically, you know, I have had some small successes, and I guess I've never really aspired to any large successes or any kind of, you know, revolution on a large scale. But, you know, I really see the value of this, and I try to say, okay, how can we make this work in K through 12 where I am? And it's like, you know, ... It's a big ellipsis. So,
you know, the work I've done has always been out of school during out of school time hours, with volunteers providing the ideas and the leadership and the talent, supported by a mix of donors over time. That means that any, whether it be at the local boys and school club, a community-based organization, the local church, a business site, someplace in the non-school hours where kids from around that place can come, where a group of adults who can be inspired by any form of learning could be trying to do things that aren't happening or can't happen, at least today, in the traditional school because of the politics and the inertia that you're talking about. I really feel strongly that, I for a long time, I can't change what the public schools are doing or not doing by myself, and maybe that. But what I can influence is what's available to those kids in the neighborhood of that school through organized non-school type activities, and so the short-term approach that I would encourage you to think of is who are people? Are there places already in the non-school hours in the area around your university or your community where people are meeting with kids already? Or could there be new places that might come together with the idea of introducing some of these ideas and thinking that you're gathering from your network of the world that could be brought into the community and maybe through the non-school program come into the school?
I think the message I get from speaking to people recently is that there is a lack, not just of networks within the university, but outside it. And they are actually looking to the university in some respects as a place where they can actually make contacts which they themselves are not making, to develop their businesses or develop their associations. And it's seeing university in a completely different way. It's rather more as a hub for learning and a hub for connection, rather than something which is a space where you go before you go and get a proper job. So I think that's something which is positive. And I think another thing is the business of who defines what people need. When I have students speaking in a round table with their teachers and saying, well, our teaching is, would you say our teaching is obsolete? And the answer is basically, well, yes it is. So how are we going to learn the skills that we need? Well, we don't know. I think that is one thing which is really the system which has been set up is no longer working.
Right.
I just posted a link. We had a fellow from Northwestern with us for a year, and one of the things that he did toward the end of his term was create a concept map pointing to all the different departments, clubs, and organizations on the university campus who had something to do with poverty and kids. And through the map, he was building an opportunity for connection and interaction that maybe no one else at the university was able to do because no one had the map. So when I talk about a four-part strategy, the first part is getting information that helps you understand what it is you're trying to work on. One of the first pieces of information is in my case, is who are the youth-serving organizations, and the second one is who are the assets who could be helping those youth-serving organizations. Both of those are represented by a database or by a map. Universities are spread throughout the community. Each university is a community of silos disconnected from each other. Well, if one of your student exercises was who are the people at this institution who care about whether it be poverty or whether it be the environment, there's different issues beyond helping kids, although the self-interest of the kids is they're the ones being helped. But an exercise you might go through is to start building a map of all the different entities within the university system, and then be talking, well, how do we share what they're doing? How do we know what they're doing? How do we bring them together? What can the students themselves be doing to facilitate that coming together and that sharing of ideas? what you start today could be continued class after class many years into the future.
Yeah, I think I've been reading a really interesting website called Breaking Smart by this Indian American. His name is Venkatesh Rao, and the idea of Breaking Smart is a play on the television series Breaking Bad, and he says that what is happening, like you say, Simon, the students already recognize it's obsolete, and they're looking actively for ways to make it, to break smart. You know, like, you know, a 14-year-old kid learns how to code and builds an app empire by the time he's 18 years old. Okay, now that's an outlier, but it's the principle is the same, is how do we create a way for our students to break smart? And for me, what I've done is I've tried to introduce them to new ways to seek information and to make sense of it and to share it. And typically this has a digital, you know, a digital emphasis, because they're not getting that anywhere else. They're getting the default and not the world that they're actually living in, which is apps and mobile applications and connecting digitally with each other. But I realize it's more than that. But I think that you know, we need to help these students break smart, and they're not getting that. They're not getting that in the university, and it's small wonder that in the United States we're suffering a crisis of funding for universities. Where in my university we got a new governor, and I mean in Illinois it's an utter disaster right now. It's even way worse than in Kentucky. They don't even have a budget for higher ed in Illinois. But in Kentucky, the guy was inaugurated, and the second day he says, "Here's my budget. Cut 4.5% from your budget for this fiscal year, which only has 4 months in it, and then I want you to cut another 13% over the next biennium. So the next 2 years we have to cut another 13%. And then, by the way, we've got a bill going through the Senate that freezes tuition. So universities are kind of stuck in this horrible, horrible space where maybe the legislature, maybe everybody realizes that the university isn't helping its students break smart. Maybe it's inchoate. I don't think they understand it. I don't think they can articulate it. And the only way they can articulate it is say, well, bad university, cut funding, then see what happens. So, I mean, I think this is...
But this is insanity. This is insanity. Yeah. It's just insane. I think the problem is I spent some time reading this week Piketty, Thomas Piketty, on Capital in the 21st Century, and the whole system is based on belief. It's not based on some scientific fact. It's based on this idea that the economy is going to grow in this particular way, and I'm not sure they even believe that anymore. I think that it's a question of a certain group who are reducing their costs to maximize their wealth, with absolutely no concern as to the community within which they no longer live. And I think that is the crucial issue, is we have a complete dislocation between those who have power and local community, which means that they have really very little concern as to what happens, because they're just looking at the bottom line. Well, the bottom line are our kids. And I think there comes a time where we have to say, well, no, education isn't about fueling your factories or proving that they have a particular level on a test, insane test system. This is not the role of, it's like, you might as well say that parenting is about standardized parenting, where you have a standardized testing system, and you're going to be a bad parent if your kid doesn't conform to certain criteria. It's insane. And I think it's our role is to say that this is insane.
But going back to what we started talking about with mapping, how do we get from you believing that, me believing that, Terry believing that, to where enough people not only believe it, but understand some policy solutions and are willing to vote for people who ultimately would represent the majority vote in different state and national legislatures, to where what you understand to be a problem is on its way toward being a solution. That will take a long time and the work of a lot of people, but it starts out with how do we get more people from the left and the right, the rich and the poor, into the same space, and I believe it's electronic space as much as physical space, to where they build empathy and understanding and a motivation to dig deeper into information and look for solutions. Again, my passion for tutor mentor programs is that in an organized non-school program, you have the ability to bring together people from different backgrounds who would never have been together with each other without that program bringing them together. You also have the potential that some of them will stay together with the program, with their fellow volunteers, with the kids they work with for many years. And over those many years, some of them will change their belief systems and their the things that motivate them to where they're willing to do more with the time, the talent, the dollars to make change that is beneficial to the kids and the communities the kids come from, as well as to themselves and the communities they come from. So it's as you sit and start, the problem is this or the problem is that. Well, what are the steps to change the problem? What is the steps to build the majority public will to get the majority public elected people to where the policy might change? And even then, implementing the policy over decades to where the things that we are concerned with now actually are different because of intentional actions repeated by a lot of people over many years. And it starts out with what we're doing today, and what you guys have been doing is you know, I try to put articles on my blog to map these things to stimulate people's thinking about it, with the goal that other people who are better writers, better communicators, better connected than I am, will spend time looking at them and recasting them with their own understanding and with their own shared goal of that other people will look at what they did and do the same thing. It's that constantly expanding ripples in the water caused by each of us casting in a stone on a regular basis, with the goal that other people are going to be caught up in the wave and cast their own stones to get more people involved.
I think that one of the reasons why I chose to stay in France is that I think we have a certain advantage for the moment, which is a big emphasis on culture, a big emphasis on French culture, a big emphasis on the public role of universities. Okay, well, we have traditional problems with the elite who hive off most of the resources for them, but at least there is, for the moment, this belief that there is a connection between local people and the local culture, because it's a smaller ballpark than the world. So if I take the case of the local multinational, which is Michelin, they are very much tied to the local community because there's a certain ethics which tie them there, and a certain belief that they are issued from this environment, therefore they continue to be in this environment, and hopefully that will continue. So I think that there is that sort of rootedness, but that's one of the problems I find with the work that I do, because in a sense I'm not rooted, and language is often power. So if you encourage everybody to be digitally literate and to learn English, those values are not neutral, and they may actually be going against local communities. So that's something which concerns me a lot.
One of the things that I've seen over the years is I've had people from Africa contact me saying, I want to duplicate the tutor-mentor connection. And I said to them that you really need to, it's not taking all of our ideas, it's building your own library of information that helps people understand your country or your continent, because the circumstances are different based on the cultural differences, the economy, and so forth. That's probably true in France and other places too. So when I go back to the four-part strategy, step one is building the information base. That information base could have commonalities, but it's also going to have differences based on the country, the continent, the culture. And but until someone is beginning to build that library, you don't go to the next three steps, which is how do we get more people looking at the library? How do we get more people talking about what's in the library, engaging with each other based on what they learned, begin to decide what are things we might do in different places where the map shows there's a need to do something, and begin to do those things. And that's a cycle. So, you know, Simon, you're in France. Terry, I think your area is kind of rural, which would be a lot different than Chicago, which is urban. It's the same issue. We use the words poverty, all these different things in the United States, but it's different. We look at it from different lenses based on the geography, where the density of population, the racial makeup of where we are. So I would love to see a rural university building an information library that collects what are the issues of rural areas, what are people in rural areas doing to solve those problems, how are they learning from each other, and they connect the two, urban and rural, where it makes sense.
It's funny that you say that, Daniel, because I had a conversation with somebody who works for a local community who was there at the round table last week, and who said, I'm very interested in connecting with you. And he said, use the words, what we need perhaps is as a group of digitally connected communities. And I think that this is also part of the problem in the Auvergne. The Auvergne is a heavily rural area where there are lots of farmers who are basically not surviving, where the European system is failing to protect them, and where they are basically working for nothing and sometimes working for less than nothing. So rural poverty in the Auvergne is a huge problem. So I think that there is one of the reasons why we have good technical equipment here is because the local region has invested heavily to connect rural areas to hubs like Clermont-Ferrand. And I think that there's probably a lot that we could do as far as connecting those populations together, because I think that the way I see it is that my role is to enable connections to wider communities so that local communities can decide for themselves based on the knowledge that they're not alone, and that this is not just a local problem, that they are tributary of decisions taken way out of their own locus of control.
I see that the passion of young people is to engage them in the process. They can be information collectors, they can be information organizers, they can be sense makers, they can be conveners. There's all kinds of different things they could be doing from as early as middle grade on up. And as they do those things, their own understanding and passion and motivations would grow at the same time.
You know, that's exactly what was my takeaway from this today, I think, is the idea that nobody's going to connect it up for me. I mean, Simon, you know, you talk about the beginning tragedy in the Auvergne. That's already happened here in my part of Kentucky, and you do not want it to happen there. It is devastating. It has led to, a poverty that is the people who stay are depressed, repressed, and that means that if you don't want to be in that state, you leave. So all of our young people leave, and our infrastructure is not built up because we don't have any political power. And you do not want that. It will happen. I mean, I'm pretty sure it'll be the same sort of road when you take the culture out of agriculture, which is basically its connectedness. Then it dies. Then you have agribusiness, and that is a very bad business. The other thing that's been very positive for me is when I assign a long-term research project for my students, is I always do one myself. And this year, my research thing has been a blog about higher education spending in Kentucky, and trying to make it an information hub. Like you say, Daniel, if you have to build a knowledge base for people. So I found that there wasn't anything in Kentucky. No one in Kentucky was trying to gather the information together about what was happening. And part of it has been the discovery that it's happening everywhere the same way. And it's amazing. What's happening in Louisiana is the same as what's happening here, what's happening in Kansas or Oklahoma or even California, where they're talking about things like Berkeley is talking about making these huge cuts. You do not think of large California universities as being subject to the same sorts of constraints as small regional universities in Kentucky are, but they are. And so this, I think personally I'm trying to reach out and connect to people, but I think in the classroom, I think I've got two things that I'm going to do as a result of this talk today. First is I'm going to just do a simple Google map for my students with pinpoints that they can put in the map. Done this on CL MOOC, done it, I've done it several times, and I don't know why it's never occurred to me. Just help them visualize where they are at a very simple level. And the other thing is, just need to do a more active promotion of this idea that, yes, you are connected. What are the connections? Maybe they just don't even realize how rich an environment they live in. I mean, if you're in a university and you're living on campus, or even if you're commuting, it's incredibly rich environment, as far as not just the things that the university propels onto you, the arts and humanities and, all the things that you can go watch and do, but in the kinds of people worldwide who come here to teach and to learn and to research together. And I think that's going to have to be an ongoing project in my classes the rest of the semester, is to figure out a way to put all these networked areas together, and then to keep returning to them and adding things to them, and making sure that the picture, it's not just a map, but it becomes more like a landscape, right? Because I'm not satisfied with the flat nature of maps. I like them, they're helpful, but the maps need to be expanded inside of people so that it is part of their landscape, the three-dimensional. But I mean, those are the two things that I'm taking away from this today.
Well, I just posted a link. The internet is still a baby. 20 years old for most of us, which means that the large part of the population, it's less than 10 years of much use. I created a concept map in the mid-2000s showing a goal of our Tutor Mentor program of how can we build habits of learning that will motivate our kids and our volunteers to come to the website for information they want to share or information they want to get, not just while they're active with us, but in the years after they leave us. a university or a high school, they've got a student for 4 to 6 years. If over those 4 to 6 years they intentionally try to build habits where students learn and are motivated to come to the university website or different places to get and give information, then those habits should remain when they leave. And that means if your student leaves Kentucky and goes to California or New York or France, they still keep coming back to the college website to give and get information. And the potential of that in terms of solving problems, and not just for the university and the community, but in the lives of the students and alumni, is huge. But it's a stickiness habit. How do we instill a stickiness where some web portals, web platforms are places people would want to keep coming and would do so. It's just like Facebook. We go on Facebook every day out of some habit for any number of different reasons. How do we develop the same type of loyalty toward community websites that are intended to do good things?
I like the idea of stickiness, and oftentimes what that means is that we can't get so bogged down in specific concept as much as in processes that allow us to engage the world. And to me, at my level right now, there's a big push for the buzzword is workforce development, and they want, they really want students to work towards getting a job or for going to university. And to me, that has a real. I want kids to have jobs. I want people to make them I want them to be a part of a vibrant community. But oftentimes what this workforce development ends up being is corporations and businesses saying, we want a pipeline of people that we can use until we don't need them anymore, until we want to move their job to some other place in the world where we can use people there as well. And they're talking about spending a lot more money on workforce development with consequent less money for university. So there seem to be pitting two different groups of people against each other, and that's not it at all. And the stickiness that you talk about is, I don't think of as being content at all, but process, ways of doing, ways of thinking, ways of observing in the world. And I think what the people in my neck of the woods think of is that, no, this means job right now and money in hand. And if that means a 6-month certificate training, that's what it is. If that means an associate degree, that's what it is. That could mean, of course, a master's program or, an engineering degree or something like that. But, wow, I mean, it's, I really want it to be the stickiness that you're talking about, but it seems to be really being the other thing, the thing that is a little scary to me.
But I think this business of pipeline, in my teaching, I experience this because I have people who are going into teaching, ironically. There is this pipeline for teachers where they will be going through the process of being eliminated or chosen to be teachers. And that is very much a factory. I mean, it's a factory to produce. At the end, you have a certain amount of people who will be teachers, which is ironic in itself. And then there is another group who is much less well-defined. And there is where I see a bit of hope. Because it's these sort of people who are involved not in going from move your counter along the board, you go directly to jail, or you go directly to get your $200. They are actually sort of in the sort of community chest, that part of the Monopoly board, where they're trying to develop opportunities. And I think that that's really at the heart of what university needs to be, or what education needs to be. And what we all need to be part of is developing opportunities for our communities. And I think that rather than be a sort of a franchise for some distant manufacturer, we need to be actually the ones who are actually being creative, because there's a lot of very creative people in universities, and I think that if you put those creative people with other creative people, then you can have some solutions. And I think that that is where the sort of most status arrives for the university, is where they're actually creating things which people in business are interested in, or politicians are interested in. Well, I think that that's the only way forward, is we actually have to create the space in which, by force of how can I put it, opportunity, that people are actually can only say, yes, well, that's what your role is. But it has to come from us.
Well, they want it. I mean, it's clear that the students want it. If you talk to a student with half an ear for half a minute, you know they want these opportunities, and they're hungry for it, and they will work for it. They just have to figure out what they are. And that, you know, there's a lot of unlearning that has to be done. It seems almost impossible that the creative fire can have been banked so damn low. But that's the way it is in my classrooms. And that when you give them the opportunity, if you open up the draft on the stove just a little bit and you say, here's some more wood, or have you tried this? It's like, for some students, it's like a conflagration, but it's from their own minds. And for many, it's not an opportunity at all for them. It's you know, they're strategic students who want to get the grade so that they can go on and to be in the pipeline. And that is it's kind of a desperate situation. I mean, I feel desperately for my students sometimes. You know, it's what Thoreau talked about, that desperation, that silent desperation. That they don't even, maybe they're not even aware that they're desperate, which is scary as hell.
Well, let's kind of close up for today. I like to leave with what thinking of network mapping, network building, network nudging.
Definitely.
Because those students who want to be something, and whether they're motivated, hard to learn, or whether they're less motivated, they still need people to help open doors for them to job opportunities and interviews, which are difficult to find. But the reality is they're going to need that network to open doors for them the rest of their lives. And if the university or the public school can play a meaningful role in helping to build the network, facilitate the network, facilitate participation and benefit from being part of the network, then I think it creates a stickiness that inspires more people to participate on a continuous basis for the benefit of all. And as a classroom exercise, if you guys write about this, how can you inspire your kids to be thinking about it and writing about it themselves? You know, creating their own visualizations of what we are talking about, of how we share these ideas, that they might share these ideas, how they might help bring more people into the conversation. And map participation. You know, the 3 of us today, will there be 6 of us tomorrow? Will there be 10 of us the next day? What different backgrounds do the 10 of us represent? What different parts of the community do the 10 of us represent? You know, the mapping and the analysis of the mapping is part of the process. If we keep talking forever and there's only the 3 of us, it's really good talking, but the network hasn't grown.
Well, that's not true, but I would say I would just like to take away one thing, and that is the importance for me of the word people. And I was thinking about the library, and I was thinking about this idea of opportunity, the idea of a hub. And for me, the role of the university, perhaps the library, has to be that to replace the books with people. And those people are ones that you can consult, and those are the ones that you can actually go away and do things with and create projects with, because that's what I saw the last week. Last week I saw that. And I think that when we talked about the network not growing, I think, Daniel, to reassure you, the network is growing, and they may not be in the Hangout, but it's happening behind it.
Right, I didn't mean that literally. I know that it's growing, but the mapping of the process is something kids in different places could be learning to do, and to understand that the network is growing, to understand who's in the conversation, who needs to be in the conversation, that they might reach with an invitation that draws them into the conversation, and to feel good over time of how that network continues to expand. One just comment about the library, and that is, while us talking to each other, and this is really valuable. The habit of learning and reading and reflection. Each of us go back on our own and follow the links to what each other is saying. I don't have time to read a 600 or 800 page book every week, but I do have time to look at blogs, and so the connection of people hopefully also leads to habits of personal learning and reflection, which creates a deeper understanding of an intuitive understanding of what we're talking about when people connect.
Well, the lesson is so important that, one of my heroes is Miles Horton, and he's one of the founders of the voting schools in the South during the Jim Crow era. And one of the things he said was, okay, you start where you are with what you have, and you start as simply as you possibly can. And that's really what I'm talking about doing in the classroom. I mean, I can handle that. That's something that I can do and do better. And I am going to do better. And I am going to cajole, and I'm going to convince, and I'm going to sell, and I'm going to evangelize in the classroom more and more. And I have in the past, but I think this year I'm going to change this to, really as being one of my major goals is to get people to expose the networks that are already there. Because that's what it is. It's just like sweeping, and underneath you see, oh, look at that. There's a line that goes over there. They know what they are. They just don't acknowledge them. And I think I'm going to have to do that in the classroom. I'm going to have to get them to acknowledge not only their own networks, but other people's networks, and ultimately the connections between those networks, so that they all have that moment, like we all have had, where we realize that, oh, that door opens up to a mighty mansion of thousands of doors, all of which can help me in what I am doing. I think that's, like you say, Simon, that's what teachers do, and I know that's what tutors do.
Mapping your networks, I got interns that come to me from different colleges for the last 10 years. One of the exercises I've had with the first week is map your network. Do a PowerPoint, do a presentation, do a sheet of paper, create a map showing your network in terms of your family, who are they connected to, your work, who are they connected to, your college, who are they connected to. That helps me understand them and their strengths and the potentials for the internship. But if students are mapping their network, and those networks are then compared and connected to each other in each other's networks, they really begin to see that collectively they have a much greater and more powerful network than anyone imagined they possibly had. Activating the nodes in those networks into being part of the conversation is a process, but knowing the network where you are now is a step toward growing the network to where you want to be in the future.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that there's one word which came back to me time and time again from the students this year who've been reflecting on what we actually brought to them, and the word was network, 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 network. So they've got that message, and I think that that sort of is explicited in how they actually behave more and more. So I think that that is extraordinarily positive, and I think that I don't know where it's going to go next, but we have to start with that. I think that's probably a good point to
it's a good place to stop.
To stop.
Thank you for bringing us together again.
Yeah,
thank you very much indeed.
Thanks to both of you all very much.
See you later.
Enjoy your weekend.
Bye-bye.
We'll be back in touch.